Welcome to the fifth episode of Tech to Sustain Conversations for a Greener Tomorrow. We are discussing in this particular episode how business models are being challenged with technological interventions and how sustainability can be the game changer in customer experience. So, just staying on the topic of sustainability persistence by the leaders. Funny, I would like to come to you. Do you think these commitments to the sustainability calls for is there a requirement of rethinking the organization's purpose, core values, all those things? Because I'm also hearing that some of these technologies that look promising have real concerns of shaking up the conventional business models and value chains. Are we going to see kind of new business models and new purposes of the organizations emerge out of it?
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at the research done by McKinsey, especially on sustainability, centering the strategy on sustainability stands number two in the transformation tools for CEOs. So that shows the priority that CEOs are giving to sustainability. So if you at the heart of addressing sustainability is innovation, and technology plays a key role. Human mindset, leadership vision, these all come in play. So if you look at it holistic view, sustainability is number two in CEO's priority. That's the key for transformation within the organization. So we have already seen many organizations redefine their values in terms of what they ultimately sell to their consumers. And again, that's the product authenticity, product traceability that they want to showcase and deliver back to the consumers. And sustainability is one thing that retail and grocery business must definitely define um, in terms of selling their customers today. But more than that, organizations also need to look at their consumers as more than just buyers. In fact, they are more like partners that drive their sustainability visions. So the demand from customers, consumers, what they're looking for drives these sustainability strategies. Because consumers and customers aren't just looking to pay premiums on sustainable products, but also looking at recycling points where they can drop off the packaging materials. They're looking at the used containers, anything that can be recycled. So it's a product life cycle end to end is what they're looking. So they want to avoid seeing their product
Sure.
in landfills or at worst um, outside of the waste management system as a whole. So they want that traceability, authenticity, and, and value chain within the product life cycle. So that means the industry must also actively communicate the vision of proactively driving environmental and social impacts to its consumers, also orchestrating sustainable practices within the consumers, suppliers, and partners. So it's more of a collaboration and getting that alignment across consumer, suppliers, trading partners. It's a huge commitment. Finally, I would say a commitment to sustainability. It's a long-term undertaking. It will be a position of it's more like a process of repositioning the organization's core values and propositions in new terms. But we have already seen time after time the shift in the market, the shift in the consumer demand. It's forcing the organizations to rethink their organization purpose and core values.
So maybe I would move to John Turner here. You heard a lot of terminologies in terms of sustainable products which are required, traceabilities. But from a producer association, do you think all these things have the pace today, or is it still lagging the pace?
It's a tough question. I think when it comes to pace, I think it all comes down to labor, right? Like, I know this is not part of our topic here, but we're talking about technology. But I think technology and labor are integrated more than we talk about. in public necessarily. You look at fresh produce up until recently, and it's all been picked by hand. And we're getting closer and closer with every year to automation. There are some crops that, are really automated. You look at a potato harvest or a carrot harvest, you know, it only takes 6 guys to get potatoes out of the field and into the box and out the door and onto the truck. In fact, we need more truckers to haul potatoes than we need people to harvest the potatoes. Nothing could be farther from the truth from strawberry production or blueberry production. Are we going to get harvesters there, automated harvesters? Yeah. Yeah. But then it comes back to energy costs, and, all of a sudden, I was talking to a friend of mine on about, charging stations for automated harvesters, right? So now you're talking about an electric grid into fields. Where's the definition of sustainability for that, right? And then all of a sudden we automate all these jobs. Well, now what do these people do that used to harvest fresh produce to make ends meet for their family? So where does sustainability meet employer-employee relationships, right? And there's no easy answer to that. I'd pick on Fani working at Albertsons, at the front end. I like going down the conveyor belt and having someone bag my groceries. I was a bagger. That's how I used to bag groceries. I love making sure that my tomatoes or my bread or my bananas don't get bruised on the way out of the store. Now I can do it myself, but again, those are entry level jobs. And as we race towards automation, all of a sudden the level of education needs to go up in order to meet the needs of tomorrow's workforce. And so I think that's where, how fast? I don't have an answer to that question. I don't even want to pretend to know that I know what the pace of automation is going to be in every industry, but every industry, it's there. Autonomous trucks, they're coming. But what does that mean for the truck driver? Right now, we have a driver shortage of 60 drivers. Those are great jobs for those people that drive trucks. So all of a sudden, now we have an automated trucks. What happens to those hundreds of thousands of people that used to feed their families because they had a job as a truck driver? I think those are some complicated topics that we don't address under the guise of sustainability, because it's all about metrics to the bottom line rather than metrics to feeding families across the around the globe.
No, very, very valuable things, because even when the UN developed the so-called Sustainable Developmental Goals, when I said that the initial 8 ones were social in nature, and then there were a set of environment. If you increase on one, the others will go down. If you increase on the others will go down. So right in the middle, they brought in responsible consumerism. Right in the middle, they brought sustainable cities, the infrastructure, and all the things. Because until unless you address the middle part of it, if you do one, the other will go down, the other will go up. So I think very, very, very valuable points. And maybe Justin, want to bring in here is, in terms of all this, what John talked about, as well as Funny talked about, you as a big retailer have a role to play on educating the consumers as well. And especially during the time of the pandemic, the online buying has shot up. And do you really think that the kind of education which is currently happening on the responsible consumerism is good enough, or is there a room to improve there?
Sure. Hey, so yeah, it's interesting. Last year, when I would give updates and insights to our customers on like the top trends, right? The top thing in consumer products was launching direct to consumer sites and e-commerce, and a shift in sales and volume and focus, and building out consumer data platforms, right? So I get one-to-one data that I have a hard time getting today through retailers if I'm a CPG brand. And it's interesting because that was still top priority in Q1 of this year and dropped, I'd say, down a notch, and was replaced by all the supply chain and other topics that I mentioned earlier. And what's interesting, the tension that's playing out, just I'm giving you some industry view first, is like, as stores have opened up, right, and you see the shopper back in grocery and also non-traditional retailing with the grocery aisle, like some of the major retailers, is e-commerce still a top priority for CPG? Or is it just another channel that we'll continue to maintain and invest in? And I don't have an answer yet. I think it's just an interesting topic happening or being discussed right now in terms of like, where does that channel fit in? How do you manage trade funds and trade spend along that channel in addition to traditional retail? Let me just pick one element to focus on as related to direct to consumer, and that's around. I'm going to talk a little bit about packaging and what some of the things to consider are. And I'll start with some stats. Earlier this year, the numbers looked like, and still expecting to see 10% of all CPG sales in the U.S., especially going through e-commerce channels, and this is looking at next year. In response, sustainable packaging has become like a top customer priority, right? And of the 250 CPG brands out there, from a research study that had been done, 75% reported that they were planning on spend more on packaging over the next year, according to this consultant that covers the industry. And what's interesting about this is it shows a dramatic increase from a couple years ago, and that's not surprising. So like what we went through this last year and a half has really just accelerated interest in and investment in e-commerce, and then everything around that is somewhat catching up, including packaging. And it's one of my the solution individuals on my team. He always describes it as like, if I want to buy a razor blade and I'm on an e-commerce site, I just need to see the actual blade and the handle, right? I don't need all the packaging around it, but the packaging was designed to stand out on a shelf, right? And designed to be observed by a shopper in a store. And so again, tension that plays out is, do you design different packaging for the same product for online versus in-store? Something to think about. In terms of the packaging industry, we're seeing a lot of potential growth there in the next 5 years because of e-commerce. And so when you really dive into that, though, there's some things to think about. 75% of all plastic ever produced has become waste, and production is expected to triple by 2050. New research suggests that the accumulation of plastic waste in the oceans is expected to triple by 2040 to an average of 32 million tons. Yikes, right? And so then you look at like corrugated material, which, as we talked about earlier, boxes for shipping and whatnot, and that also includes the plastic and other materials that go into that. Like that's part of e-commerce, right? That's increased packaging to deliver that product to you at a convenience, right? So hence why there is this complicated kind of factor when you think about e-commerce, direct to consumer, and then packaging around that. So in terms of some things we're doing, I know this was one of the questions, was like, what's Amazon doing? So we launched a program called Frustration-Free Packaging. So that's where we work with manufacturers of product to help them with easy to open, 100% recyclable packaging, ready to ship in their container without the need for additional shipping. And that program started in 2015. And so since then, we've seen in the metrics that we have together, a reduction of weight of outbound packaging per shipment has been reduced by 36%, which is a big part of like the cost of packaging. Eliminated more than 1 million tons of packaging materials. And then actually, this is where technology is starting to come in too, because we use machine learning to help in our own production facilities determine the right packaging for deliveries, right? And then also, like, what's the right size box and material that goes into a shipping product that's not already in a shipping ready product. And then we're actually able to help our customers with that, right? Around e-commerce. We're doing that. You mentioned P&G earlier. We've got a really cool story of kind of rethinking the Tide box, right? And how do you make that like package ready to ship? And more of our customers are asking for guidance on that. So yet another space that we are focused on in the CPG space. We talked earlier about manufacturing and right energy savings and water savings in a production facility when you move to cloud. So we're not even talking about like technology, like cloud technology today, but when you move from a data center into a cloud environment, there are sustainability savings there that can be added up. This is e-commerce packaging, which can be added up. So you start lining these things up, and it ties back to still, you got to have a good way of tracking and reporting against this, and building this into an overall priority for the organization.